Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing and check out our Patreon for more. Enjoy the video. The steady beep of medical equipment filled the room as consciousness slowly returned. Eyelids fluttered open, revealing a stark white ceiling. Disorientation swirled through foggy thoughts. Memories jumbled and unclear. Welcome back, Miss Stella. How are you feeling? The voice sounded far away, muffled as if underwater. A face swam into view, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a white lab coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck. What? The voice that emerged was unfamiliar, higher-pitched, softer. Confusion deepened. Where am I? What happened? You're at the clinic in Germany. I'm Dr. Sophia. Do you remember coming here for treatment? Fragments of memory surfaced, a dire diagnosis, desperation, a risky experimental procedure. Signing stacks of papers without reading the fine print. I think so. How long was I out? About 3 months. The treatment was successful. You're fully cured. Relief washed through, followed quickly by suspicion. It couldn't be that easy, could it? And something still felt off. If you're feeling up to it, perhaps you'd like to sit up. Take things slowly. With the doctor's assistance, Roberto, his name was Roberto, pushed up to a seated position. The blanket fell away, revealing an unfamiliar body. Slender arms. Panic clawed up his throat. What is this? What have you done to me? Dr. Sophia's expression was sympathetic but firm. As we explained before the procedure, there was a possibility of significant physical changes. The treatment works by altering DNA to eliminate the disease. In your case, it seems to have altered your chromosomes as well. You turned me into a woman? The high-pitched shriek that emerged was jarring. Technically, yes, but Miss Stella, you must understand, you were dying. This was the only way to save your life. Don't call me that. I'm Roberto, not Stella. I'm afraid that's no longer the case, legally or physically. You signed documents acknowledging the risks and potential outcomes. Your new identity as Stella Moretti has already been registered. The world spun. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination from the drugs. Apparently Stella now, struggled to process the magnitude of the change. Perhaps it would help to see for yourself? Dr. Sophia held out a small mirror. With trembling hands, Stella took it. The face staring back was both familiar and foreign. Softer jaw, fuller lips, longer lashes. Still recognizably related to Roberto, but undeniably feminine. The mirror clattered to the floor. This is impossible. You can't just change someone's entire identity. I assure you it's quite possible. Groundbreaking, in fact. You're our first fully successful human trial. Anger flared, hot and fierce. You used me as a guinea pig? I'll sue you for everything you're worth. Dr. Sophia remained maddeningly calm. You're welcome to try, of course, but I remind you again of the waivers you signed. We were fully transparent about the experimental nature of the treatment. But not about this. Stella gestured wildly at her new body. Page 17. Paragraph 3 specifically mentioned the possibility of chromosomal alterations. We couldn't have predicted the exact nature of the changes, but you were informed of the risks. Stella's head pounded. She vaguely recalled skimming through a mountain of paperwork, too desperate for a cure to care about the details. What a fool she'd been. This is insanity! I demand you change me back immediately! Dr. Sophia shook her head. I'm afraid that's not possible. The alterations to your DNA are permanent. Attempting to reverse them would likely kill you, assuming we could even figure out how to do so, which we can't. So that's it? I'm just supposed to accept this? Live the rest of my life as someone else entirely? I know it's a tremendous adjustment. We have counselors on staff who specialize in identity transitions. They'll work with you to... I don't want counseling. I want my life back. The door opened, admitting a younger doctor. Dr. Sammy, Stella hazily recalled. He assessed the situation with a frown. Is everything all right in here? I heard shouting. Our patient is having some difficulty accepting the outcome of the procedure, Dr. Sophia explained diplomatically. Dr. Sammy's expression hardened. Miss Moretti, I understand this is shocking, but you need to calm down. Your body is still recovering from months of invasive treatment. Stress and agitation will only set back your progress. Don't tell me to calm down. You had no right to do this to me. We had every right. You gave us that right when you signed on for experimental treatment. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we need to sedate you? The threat hung in the air. Stella's fists clenched, nails digging into unfamiliar palms. She wanted to lash out, to scream and rage and destroy everything in sight. But a lifetime of ruthlessly suppressing emotion took over. Fine, she bit out. I'll cooperate. For now. Dr. Sammy nodded curtly. Good. We'll start you on hormone therapy immediately to ease the transition. Dr. Sophia will walk you through the basics of your new physiology. As the younger doctor left, Stella struggled to wrap her mind around the surreal situation. Less than an hour ago, from her perspective, she had been Roberto Moretti, powerful businessman and self-made millionaire. Now she was this, a stranger in her own skin. I know this is overwhelming, Dr. Sophia said gently, but try to focus on the positive. You're cancer-free. You have a second chance at life. What kind of life? Stella's voice cracked. Everything I've worked for, everything I've built, it's all tied to who I was. How am I supposed to just start over? One day at a time. You're still you inside, even if the outside has changed. Your intelligence, your drive, those haven't gone anywhere. Stella laughed bitterly. You clearly don't understand how the world works, Doctor. A man can get away with being ruthless, cutthroat. A woman? They'll eat me alive? Perhaps. Or perhaps this is an opportunity to approach life differently, to forge connections instead of burning bridges. The words struck a nerve. Roberto had always prided himself on his independence, on needing no one. But in those final months before the procedure, when he'd faced his mortality alone, he'd begun to wonder if it had been worth it. I don't know how to do that, Stella admitted quietly. Dr. Sophia squeezed her hand. That's what we're here for. To guide you through this transition, physically and emotionally. Will you let us help you? Stella wanted to refuse, to cling to anger and denial, but exhaustion was already setting in, her new body feeling like lead. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, but I hope you'll choose to embrace this second chance, difficult as it may be. Stella closed her eyes, took a deep breath. When she opened them again, determination glinted in their depths. All right, where do we start? The next few weeks passed in a blur of tests, therapies, and consultations. Stella struggled to adjust to her new body, constantly bumping into things and misjudging her reach. The hormones left her emotional, prone to unpredictable mood swings that were utterly foreign to Roberto's carefully controlled temperament. But slowly, gradually, she began to adapt, to find a strange sort of comfort in her softer curves and smoother skin. The counseling sessions, initially resented, became a lifeline as she grappled with her shifting sense of self. I keep catching glimpses of myself and not recognizing who I see, Stella confessed during one session. It's like I'm haunting my own body. Dr. Liana, the psychologist, nodded in understanding. That's a common experience for those undergoing significant physical changes. Your mind needs time to reconcile your internal self-image with your new external reality. But it's more than just looks. I feel different, think differently sometimes. That's likely a combination of hormonal shifts and the psychological impact of such a major life change. Your core personality isn't fundamentally altered, but you may find yourself experiencing emotions and reactions in new ways. Stella frowned. I'm not sure I like it. I was always in control before. Now I feel unpredictable. Vulnerable. Vulnerability isn't inherently negative, Dr. Liana pointed out gently. It can lead to deeper connections, greater empathy. I suppose. Stella didn't sound convinced. But how am I supposed to go back to my old life feeling like this? My entire career was built on being tough, uncompromising. Perhaps it's time to consider that your old life, as you knew it, is over. This is an opportunity to build something new. The words struck Stella like a physical blow. She'd been clinging to the idea that once she left the clinic, she could somehow reclaim her former existence. But faced with the reality of her transformation, that fantasy crumbled. "I don't know how to be anyone but Roberto," she whispered. Dr. Liana leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time to get to know Stella, not as a replacement for Roberto, but as an evolution. What parts of your old self do you want to keep? What might you want to change?" It was a daunting prospect. But as the days passed, Stella found herself considering the question more and more. She thought back on Roberto's life, the wealth, the power, but also the loneliness, the string of failed relationships, the absence of true friends. One afternoon, about 2 months into her recovery, Stella stood before the full-length mirror in her private room. She studied her reflection, cataloging the changes. The graceful curve of her hips, the delicate arch of her brows. Tentatively, she smiled, watching the way it softened her features. "Hello, Stella," she murmured. "I think it's time we got properly acquainted." As her discharge date approached, anxiety began to mount. How would she explain her transformation to business associates, to what remained of her family? The idea of facing the outside world was terrifying. "Have you given any thought to where you'll go after leaving us?" Dr. Sophia asked during a checkup. Stella shook her head. "I can't go back to New York. Too many people knew Roberto there. I was thinking, maybe I'll travel for a while. Figure things out. That could be good for you. A fresh start, new experiences." "I've never really done that before," Stella admitted. "Traveled just for the sake of it, I mean. It was always business trips, tightly scheduled." Dr. Sophia smiled encouragingly. "Then this is your chance to see the world through new eyes, literally and figuratively." The day of discharge arrived all too soon. Stella stood in her room, surrounded by the few possessions she'd accumulated during her stay. She wore a simple blouse and skirt, still awkward in women's clothing, but slowly getting used to it. A knock at the door preceded Dr. Sophia's entrance. "Are you ready?" Stella took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be, I suppose. Remember, you can always reach out if you need support. We'll be monitoring your progress closely. Thank you for everything." The words felt inadequate, but Stella meant them sincerely. As they walked through the clinic's halls, Stella's steps faltered. "Wait, there's something I need to do first." She made her way to Dr. Sammy's office, knocking hesitantly. He looked up in surprise as she entered. "Miss Moretti, what can I do for you?" Stella swallowed hard. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior when I first woke up. I was scared, angry, but that's no excuse for how I treated you." Dr. Sammy's expression softened. "That's very kind of you to say, but no apology is necessary. Your reaction was understandable, given the circumstances. Still, I'm grateful for what you've done for me, even if I didn't show it at first." He stood, offering his hand. "It's been an honor to be part of your journey, Miss Moretti. I wish you all the best." Stella shook his hand, marveling at how natural the gesture felt now. "Thank you. And please, call me Stella." As she walked out of the clinic into the bright German sunshine, Stella felt a strange mix of trepidation and excitement. The world stretched out before her, full of possibilities she'd never considered. For the first time in a long while, she smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as Stella Moretti. Not a replacement for Roberto, but a new chapter in an ongoing story. She hailed a taxi, sliding into the back seat with newfound grace. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked. Stella paused, considering. Then, with a spark of spontaneity she'd never allowed herself before, she replied, "The airport, please. I think it's time for an adventure." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Stella watched the clinic recede in the rearview mirror. It had been the site of her rebirth in more ways than one. Now it was time to see what this new life had in store. She thought of Roberto, of the man she'd been, with his rigid routines and carefully cultivated image. There was loss there, certainly, but also a sense of liberation, the freedom to redefine herself, to explore aspects of life she'd never allowed herself to consider. The taxi wound through the streets of Munich, and Stella found herself drinking in the sights with fresh eyes. The ornate architecture, the bustling cafes, the vibrant street life, all of it seemed more vivid, more immediate than it ever had before. At the airport, she approached the ticket counter with only the vaguest notion of a destination in mind. "Where would you like to go?" the attendant asked brightly. Stella hesitated, then smiled. Somewhere warm, with beaches and history. After some discussion, she settled on Greece. As she boarded the plane, carry-on bag in hand, a thrill of excitement coursed through her. This was so unlike Roberto, spontaneous, open to new experiences. But it felt right for Stella. The flight passed in a blur of anticipation. When they touched down in Athens, the warmth and bustle of the city enveloped her. Stella made her way to a small boutique hotel, charmed by its quaint balconies and view of the Acropolis. That evening, she ventured out to explore. The narrow streets were alive with music and laughter, the scent of grilled meats and sea air mingling in the warm breeze. Stella found herself drawn to a lively taverna, its outdoor seating spilling onto the sidewalk. "Table for one?" the waiter asked. Stella nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Dining alone had never bothered Roberto. He'd worn his solitude like armor. But now, surrounded by groups of friends and couples, she felt a pang of loneliness. As she perused the menu, struggling with the unfamiliar Greek names, a voice from the next table caught her attention. "First time in Athens?" Stella looked up to see a woman about her age smiling warmly. She had curly dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Is it that obvious?" Stella asked ruefully. The woman laughed. "Only because you look as overwhelmed as I did on my first visit. I'm Elena, by the way." "Stella, nice to meet you. Would you like some help deciphering the menu? I've been here a week, so I'm practically an expert," Elena said with a wink. Stella hesitated, Roberto's ingrained distrust of strangers warring with Stella's desire for connection. After a moment, she nodded. "That would be lovely, thank you." Before she knew it, Stella found herself joining Elena's table. The other woman was a teacher from Canada, taking a sabbatical to travel. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Stella soon found herself laughing and sharing stories. "So what brings you to Greece?" Elena asked as they lingered over coffee and baklava. Stella paused, unsure how to answer. "I'm starting over, I suppose, trying to figure out who I am." Elena nodded in understanding. "Aren't we all? That's the beauty of travel. It gives you the space to reinvent yourself." As they parted ways that evening, exchanging contact information and promises to meet up again, Stella felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the balmy night air. She'd made a friend, something Roberto had never prioritized. Over the next few weeks, Stella threw herself into exploring Greece. She wandered the ruins of the Acropolis, marveling at the weight of history. She island-hopped through the Cyclades, basking on sun-drenched beaches and swimming in crystal-clear waters. And everywhere she went, she found herself opening up to new connections. The honeymooning couple who invited her to join their sunset cruise. The gregarious Australian backpackers who adopted her into their group for a night of ouzo and dancing. The elderly Greek woman who insisted on teaching her to make proper tzatziki. With each interaction, each new experience, Stella felt herself changing, softening. The hard edges of Roberto's personality began to blur, making room for a gentler, more empathetic approach to the world. One evening, as she sat on the beach watching the sun sink into the Aegean, Stella pulled out her phone. She stared at the blank screen for a long moment before pulling up her contacts. Her finger hovered over a name she hadn't thought about in years. Taking a deep breath, she pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, then a tentative voice answered. Hello? Maria, it's Stella, your sister. There was a long pause. Roberto, is that really you? Stella swallowed hard. Yes and no, it's complicated, but I'm still family. And I'm sorry. For everything. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Stella began the long process of reconnecting with the sister she'd pushed away years ago. It wouldn't be easy. There was too much history, too much hurt. But for the first time, she was truly willing to try. Later that night, lying in bed in her small rented villa, Stella reflected on how far she'd come. The anger and fear that had consumed her in those first days after the transformation had faded, replaced by a cautious optimism about the future. She thought of Roberto, not as a separate person, but as a part of herself. The drive, the ambition, the sharp intelligence, those qualities were still there. But now they were tempered by newfound empathy, a willingness to connect. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out Patreon for a lot more content and early access to YouTube videos.